All right, I guess we are live. Let's see. A little bit of a delay. All right, well, I'll get started here. Wait for some people to show up a little bit. Let's see, maybe we could put a question in. Start a Q&A. Where are you from? Hey, my name's Kevin. I am based in Raleigh these days, but I spent the beginning of my career in Chicago and then went to New York City for a little bit, then back to Chicago. Now I'm in North Carolina. I've worked in a whole bunch of different industries, creating motion graphics for a wide range of clients, all different sizes and brands, direct with companies, corporate, ad agencies, in-house agencies, all sorts of different places. And I've always appreciated mentoring and tutoring and sharing the knowledge that I have about After Effects, especially since I wouldn't be here today without a whole bunch of people before me who created tutorials and lessons and videos. All right, just checking out my chat a little bit. So today I did want to start and not show that, but instead talk a little bit about some of the things that might be challenging for new users of After Effects. It's a pretty complex program. And it could be kind of a big hurdle to try and learn this program, especially when you know other Adobe programs. There's just so many buttons, so many different ways to do things, so many different things you can do with the software. And I just hope to demystify that a little bit. So I see a couple people joining finally, so thanks for joining today. If you have any kinds of questions, throw them into the chat. I'm going to go through some basics today about, I think I'm going to focus on the timeline and just navigating that. I think that can be an initial struggle for people who are new. All right. So let's see. Let's dig into the kind of basics of After Effects. One of my early teachers in another program, an Illustrator, an Adobe Illustrator, helped me a lot by limiting the tools to use in the program. Basically, when this came up, the software popped up. I should have had this loaded before, I guess. You know, there's so many different tools here. If you open a new file, blah, 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 whatever size. Go. There's so many different tools in this palette over here, right? There's twirls and gradients and meshes and all kinds of different things. And I think one of the most useful things that I learned early on was learn the pen tool, learn the basic shapes tools, ignore brushes, ignore a whole bunch of this stuff until you're maybe at a later stage in your understanding of the program. And I think that's a very useful approach to After Effects as well. Like I said, you can do so many different things. You've got all these different palettes. You've got all these different workspaces. So I'm just going to work in the default workspace. And I guess maybe I should explain what a workspace is. A workspace is just a different panel layout of all of these panels that you see here. So they have some that you can create custom ones, but they also have some built in. So minimal is one. You see that takes away all of those palettes on the right side, and you're left with your project window, your composition, and your timeline. And if you wanted to see any of these or add them back in, you can go further down this column and you can see, okay, if you wanted to bring back the effects and presets over here or something like that. So you're not limited to just those workspaces, but if you find yourself working in a similar way often, you can save those and reuse them. Or if you're doing a certain type of work, for example, if you are working with text, you can see then the character palette and the paragraph palette come up. And if you look in window, you could find those here: character, paragraph. And you can also click on these three buttons, these lines here over on the side, to get these options, and you can close that panel. If we wanted to bring that back, you could do that. You can always see there's a quick key here. But then if you go back to these three, you can undock that panel. So if you had a second monitor or you want this just floating around, you can do that. If you want to redock that or even move any of these around, you can just click here, and if you grab the tab by the name, not this, but right next to it, click on that, drag, and if you move it, you'll see these little violet sort of shapes, and that's where it's going to drop it. So if you drop it here, it'll put it to the side of that. If you put it here, sometimes you have to move things out to get into it. If you want it below, you could do that. If you want it on the same tab, you could drag it to the middle. So you could do that, and then it gives it to you in this selectable side by side. So I think that's one of the very most important things to understand about this program. Is just customizing your workspace. We talked about not needing things, so I'm going to go back to the default view because that's probably what people are seeing, and they have these sort of drop down type where it folds up once you click on it, but a lot of this you're really not going to need, so you might close that. I'm going to go back to the small screen version because that gives us a little bit more minimal look at this. And if this is the project window, actually I will mention one more thing. If you have one of these selected, any one of them, and you hit the tilde key, which is the top left button on your keyboard, it's got the little accent mark, that will make whatever tab you have selected go full screen. And you can toggle that back and forth just by clicking that. So any of these, you can go in and toggle that temporarily, which can be really helpful, especially if you're wanting to see just your view or just your timeline or what have you. This is especially useful if you're working on a small screen like a laptop or you're trying to do things remotely. It might not be as critical if you were working on a large screen or have multiple screens that you can use. But in general, would say that these three are the project window, composition window, and then the timeline. So are going to be your primary windows that you'll be working with kind of in any scenario. And you can sort of tell that because they're in its own little section in the window here. Below this line, you have composition, your project, timeline. Project is where you're going to import all your files. That's where you're going to keep compositions, which is basically a timeline and different scene. And then your viewer, which is called composition. So inside project, you can create folders. If you hit enter on that folder, you can rename them. You can dock those folders. And then you can create compositions. So create a new composition. You could also do that up here, new composition. And that is going to bring up this dialog, which gives you the options for that composition. So that's going to give you width and height. There's presets if you want to use any of these. These can be confusing if you're not familiar, but if you know that you need something specific, for example, a portrait view, or just your standard HD. And there's different options for frames, frame rate. You can type in anything you want, but here are some common ones in the drop-down. You can see resolution, which is something you can change. You can change any of this afterward. And then start time code as well as duration. You can also select a background color. So if I wanted to, well, I'll just create first comp. I'll rename that there. And now you have this viewer showing your first comp, and you have the timeline for this. Kind of hard to tell because there's nothing in here yet. We also have not imported anything or created anything. So using your tools up here, you might select some text. And if I just select in here, click in that window, you can start typing. I will come over and you can see that that is now a layer in the timeline. Okay, so we have a timeline. It's 23.976 frames per second. It's kind of not too important, but that just means in 1 second there will be 23 or almost 24 frames. I have some other videos about the technical details of that if you feel like digging into that, but right now it's not too important. So nothing's selected in here yet. We can select this item either in the viewer, we can select it in the timeline, and it'll work there. And although there is a text, although you could go to the character palette and change things there, they did change things up a little bit, and now there is also this properties palette, which allows you to control a lot of things related to that item from one palette instead of having to go dig around for maybe paragraph and character and all that. So I'll just make that bigger so that we could see that. You can select text just like you would in After Effects or in Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop or pretty much any other program. You can select, you can change the colors of that if you want. We could make it left aligned, we could make it right aligned, and you can see this little item here, this little crosshair, is the anchor point. And if you looked up here, in the other transform properties, you'll see the same thing, that if you twirl down any of these layers here, you can see these same properties over here. So there's a lot of different places to adjust your different parameters, and if you wanted to adjust, say, the position, you could click and scrub that. You can zoom in and out here. You could fit up to that. Your typical quick keyboard shortcuts, so like Control-Shift-C would center that. You can see we can move that around, place your things wherever you want. So let's make another one of those. I'm just going to hit Control-D to duplicate that. I'll grab it and I'll drag it down here. I'll say, welcome to this live stream. If I drag down some of those properties, you'll see that it comes into the size that we want. Alternatively, you could also scale. So if I twirl that back down, you have scale as one of the properties in here. And I could do that. And while changing the text size doesn't change the line spacing, you can do that here by scrubbing that value. You can also select and type in numbers, and you can see the different ways that sometimes it's easier to use scale, sometimes it's easier to use the size. It's kind of just preference. Okay, so now we have these items in our timeline, and let's see, let's go through a couple of quick keyboard shortcuts. The greater than, less than keys, which is a comma and a period also, those are going to help you zoom in or out on your composition. So you can see the number changing here. You could select any of those. You could go fit up to 100%. You could fit there, and if that was bigger than the size of your comp, it would go even larger. In the timeline, if you're trying to see more or less detail of that, you can use your plus and minus. So if I hit the plus button, I'm zooming in on the timeline. You can see, here's 1 second. We were talking about frames before. And you can see now we're seeing things at the frame level as opposed to the second level. You can do that same thing down here with this little mountain view. You can click back and forth to click those. You can drag this. If you are zoomed in and you want to drag around, you can use the hand tool. You could drag it there. Or if you have another tool selected and you hold the space bar, you get that hand there and you can drag that. You can also control it here with this little slider here or this slider at the bottom. And if you pull one of these out, you can zoom in that way, and you can see this moves along with that. So multiple ways to navigate this timeline. This is probably one of the most useful things or critical things that you need to get used to. Just navigating, and I'm constantly using plus and minus and the hand to move my way around the timeline. Okay. In here, you can click on the box and change the label colors if that helps, just to keep things straight. I will often keep it different types of items at different colors. And then let's say we wanted to, if you have this selected, I'm going to just duplicate a couple let's Control D, or just right click, and actually I guess it would be under Edit, Duplicate, and then you can move those around. Hi. So another thing you'll probably want to do is select the different layers in your timeline. And an easy way to do that is to use Control and up and down. So I'm holding Control, using the arrow up and down, and I can switch between the layers that I'm selecting doing that. You can also use the number pad. If you have a number pad on your right side, like the keypad, you know, the digits on the right, I don't think it works with the numbers on the top the same. They actually function a little differently. So, but if you just select the number here, you can select your layer that way. And if we had, let's just say we had a couple of those, duplicate, you can type in the whole number. So if I just hit 2, it goes to that, but if I hit 2, 0 real quick, it'll go to layer 20. So these are really helpful. Navigating the program is the biggest part of figuring out this program, to try and make sense of it, since it can be so complex. Oh, I see a first chat. India, that's awesome. Welcome. Thanks for joining today. Appreciate you. Again, please, if you have any questions, now that people are joining a little bit, throw your questions into the chat. Happy to answer anything. If you're a little beyond beginner, I'm just sort of starting off with really basic info here. I'm trying to get my sea legs up a little bit also on streaming, since this is a little bit new to me. So in Control Z, obviously undo. And most of this stuff you can also do from up top in the menu. So duplicate is up there, select all, deselect all. Those are all helpful. Okay, so let's see. Let's make a couple other items. There are what's called shape layers. So that means you can create items direct in After Effects. You don't necessarily have to import something. So if we see rectangle, rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, star tools, if we double click that, have nothing selected, and then double click it, I will get this shape layer. And with that, with any shape layer, you have a fill and a stroke option. So if we just add a stroke there, you can see that you can drag that up and get a stroke on there. And then on the shape layer, or if you wanted to create an item, a new shape layer from the menu, you could go new, and then that would be shape layer there. There's one gotcha with this shape layer. If you have another item selected, let's select the hello world. This is the same tool that masks an object. So if I have something selected and I guess I should say first, if you don't have an item selected, I double clicked it the first time, but you could also drag and create new ones in there. And you can see it's creating this in the same layer, in the same shape layer. So you can have multiple objects in one layer that way, but you could also, if you wanted them separate, just click off of it and create a new one, and you can see you get a whole separate layer there. But as I was saying, if you have another object selected and you're using this, it's also going to act as the mask tool. So if I click and drag there, now I am masking that text. And you can see a new mask is added to this layer here. And if you look at that, you have options for feathering on here. You have mask opacity, which can get a little confusing, and then expansion, which can be kind of helpful. If you drew something and there's some techniques that lean on this, you can shrink or expand it beyond the borders there. Let's see, I'm looking for the chat. Let's see. Sorry, did I miss a question from you, Anash? If you look at this, you can also invert it. There's a tab there, so that might be helpful. Or you could do subtract, which does basically the same thing. Okay, so you have shape layers, you have masks. You could also use the pen tool up here to draw a mask. So if you just click there and then close that, you'll end up with the same type of shape. Or if you didn't have anything selected and you use the pen tool, it'll create a shape layer if you wanted something that was not a regular shape like that. A couple other shape layers that are in here is the rounded rectangle, and that's actually just a setting inside. If you twirl down the rectangle path, you'd see it on this one too, even the regular rectangle path. There is size, position, and roundness. This one just has the roundness set to 0. So if you were to scrub that, you can round it even more, and if you round it to a certain point and it was a perfect square, you end up with a circle. So that can also be a helpful technique to use as you're animating. Okay, now you might have seen me do something there. I'll delete this. I'm going to get rid of some of this stuff. Now, almost everything that in After Effects, you can see there's 2 dimensions here. So you have the position, the X and the Y, and sometimes these are linked. So if that little link button is there, you can drag in. You could drag in, it'll scale proportionately, or you can unlink it and be able to just move one of them. So you got your animation, and it gets a little tricky with paths, and because you have the transformation position, so you can position it that way, but you also have this other place to move it. So that's kind of just a choice, whatever your preference is. Might change depending on technique, but you don't get all of the transform properties. So if we were to remove some of this, I'm going to go back to this, and then if we twirl that down, or there's a lot of quick keys. I use M, you can see the mask. I'll just get rid of that. Anash, do send me that video clip. If you want to go to AE Tech Desk, what is it? AE Tech Desk. Should be in my site. I gotta go find that. Let's see. It's aetechdesk.company.site. Or you could throw it in the chat. I'll try if I can see it, but I'll put this link in here. That's my website, and from there, do I have a way to contact me in there? Let's see. Let me find my Gmail address. Okay, my email address is going to be aftereffects tech@gmail.com. I can't guarantee I'll get to that video today, Anash, but if you want to send that to me, I can definitely make that a focus for a future stream. But back to the video. So we have all these transform properties. If you had this twirled up, there are different keystrokes that you can use to just show one of those. So P will show position. A shows the anchor point. If you hit R, that'll show the rotation. And you can see that it does exactly what you'd think. You can use S for scale. And you can use T for opacity. So you can also hold Shift to get to those. So if you wanted to see anchor point and position, I hit A once, then I hit Shift and P, you can add that, Shift and R, and now I can see just these parameters here. Okay, diving back into the shape layer a little bit, if we were to use this, and you click, and let's say you want it centered, well, there's a few things that you can use here. Down here is this title action safe. So if you click that on, you can get this little grid, which helps you see some of the center points. And if you want it to be centered, you could drag it and hope for the best. Or if you click in the middle and then hold Alt, or sorry, not Alt, but Control, it'll drag it from the middle only. Kind of looks like a little mouth talking, actually. If you hold Shift also, it'll keep that a perfect circle as you go. And so on ellipse, if you see that, you can have the same parameters there, and you can make that wider or smaller or link them and do that same thing there. Or scale, and scale is going to change the size of the stroke with it, whereas if you use the size parameters and make it really small, you'll still get this really big stroke. But let's say you wanted to change it there, everything is kind of folded into groups under your layer. So you have contents, transform, contents is going to adjust the parameters of the art itself. You won't get all these if you were to see like the text. You don't have that. You just have source text, which is what the actual text is, and there's some other options, but they're a little bit more complex for a later video. But you could change your stroke. And there's some things that do not exist in here that they do have. There's some things in here that do not align exactly with Illustrator. So in Illustrator, if you were to make an ellipse and look at the stroke here, you have these options for like where to align the stroke, whether it's going to go in the middle, on the outside, or along the center, and that does not translate. So that's something to keep in mind, and a lot of times if you need to do something that would work like that, you might have to double up your layers and do something like turn your stroke lower. And so now you can see, kind of get the outside effect of that, because you're not going to see the inside because it's filling up. So that actually brings me to another good tool in here. This little white dot is the solo button. So if you have a bunch of layers, you can see just this one layer. undo that. And of course you have the eyeball, which can just turn it off altogether. And just because of some of this, there's some different techniques when you're animating that you might need to duplicate objects quite a bit more. Okay. Another thing, quick key that you can use is if you hit U, the letter U twice, really quick, it'll bring up all of the active parameters, things that you've changed already. So here we could do something like that, or change, well, there's no stroke on that one. So another thing you can do is select it, and you can right click and go to rename, but I usually just hit the enter button. So we could say circle fill. A lot of times I'll name that to circle stroke, just to keep things clear. All right, thanks Anash for sending that. I'll check that out. I'll have to open that on another computer I'm looking at. I have some security settings that won't allow that. Let me see if I can. Yeah, so like a text and kind of overlay thing. I see that. Yeah, okay. I'm curious, is there any particular part of that that you are struggling with, Anash, or you're looking for the whole process of that? You know what, let me go ahead and bring that up. Here, let's switch over. Sorry, you're gonna see my face for a second so I can do this without exposing anybody's personal info. See, I'm already learning about this. Okay, let's go back to the screen. Okay, so here's what Anash sent. Scaling text. It's kind of masked. You know, a lot of times I will look at this closely, just scrub really slow. You can see there's some like wobble and scaling going on here, sort of wiggling a little bit. It's really jumpy. Can't tell if that footage is being affected by the layer or if the layer is maybe just kind of, you know, is that being distorted, or is it just laying over? There's some techniques, if you're comfortable with, you know, transfer modes, we have all of that in here. So inside here, if you click down at the bottom, you might see different columns, and if you right click at the top, you can see the different ones that are available. Modes is one of them, or if I hide that, you can click that button and switch between, so you would get your kind of multiply sort of thing. Okay, so I think I can get to that and show you how I might do something like that. Wonder if I have, let me figure out what I could bring in image wise. See if we can find a picture of some sort. Okay, we're going to use that. Okay, so I'll make a new comp for this. And I could select that and hit Control D to duplicate. Enter to change the name. And we'll call it Text Zoom. So if I use, you can also bring this in by just dragging it into the timeline. You could drag it into the viewer, or you can use Control and backslash to just drop it in. From here, I'll hit S to scale that down. And if we say type a new layer, and I will see if I hit T, I just get opacity. But if I hit Control T, I get the type tool. So I'll use that. I'm going to hit Control Alt A to select it, Control Shift C to center. And I also use the common keyboard shortcut from the other Adobe programs where you hit Control Shift and the greater than sign, which if I hold that down, you can see that's growing. So that's the same greater than zoom in sign there. Okay, so we could bring that there like that. And if we wanted, you know, we could just use something like screen, I guess, and change the opacity a little bit. And so you're starting to get this kind of look a little bit. There's also something you can do in here that's called track mats. So that's like masking, but using another layer as a mask. So if I were to take this, and if you're not seeing that, it would be under, oh, sorry. Okay, dang. Here, let me go back. I'll do all this again real quick. Okay, so I can drag this in here. I'm gonna hit S to scale it down. I'm gonna hit Control T to get that in. Center it just to make it easy. And then if I used screen here and lower the opacity, you can start to see through it. I don't know that screen will make that much difference in here as opposed to normal, just because it's doesn't have any color or texture, but if you did, that might make a different effect. But what I was saying about the masks and the track mat, if I was to make that big again, and then under track mat for the photo layer, I want to use the T, the letter, as the mask. So if I just click that, you now get the photo inside here. And if I zoom, scale that, or position it around, you can see that it's kind of inside there. And a lot of times, I think the effect that you're kind of seeing here in this one might be two layers. It might just be the text overlaid, but it does look like there's a little bit something else going on. So if I duplicate the image, you're starting to see, okay, this is transparent. If you wanted to see, my background color is set to black in the composition settings, but that's really just it's actually transparent. It's just kind of a fake background. So if you click this little toggle transparency grid, you can see that this is opaque, somewhat see-through. And if I was to focus on this one, so you kind of get this effect. And then I think in this, you're seeing a little bit of a shadow around here. But the thing that I can't quite tell is sometimes they will do this and make this just a little bit different. Like, so the masked one might be distorted just slightly. Maybe scaled down a little bit. The other thing that I'm kind of seeing in here is this shadow. And so that would be probably a drop shadow of some kind. And to get that, you can either use an effect, or you can use a layer style, just like you would in Photoshop. So inside here, if you went to layer, down here is layer styles, and you can see all of those typical things that you would normally get from Photoshop layer styles. So let's say you want to use a drop shadow here. Let's see, actually we may, it gets a little tricky to figure out which layer to apply that to. Let's try that again. Layer style, where'd it go? Layer styles, drop shadow. See, the problem is that's adding, you have this distance here, but that's really only adding like to the matte, because we're not even seeing this letter T. It's not even turned on. When you set it to matte, it turns it off. And we could turn it on, and you could still make it somewhat opaque, but it'll change that up. So what I would probably do is duplicate this, and now well, you can see, maybe I could hit multiply on that, so then the white is going to go away basically, and then you get that effect from the layer style blending on top. So if maybe we made that zero distance, actually I think we have to turn it off on this, and you can just eyeball that if you want. Then we go to size. Okay, now we're starting to get, you know, that kind of multiplied blend effect. So that's, you know, not the animation, but just the look itself. Okay, so from here, another item that you can use in After Effects is something called a null object. So if you come up to layer and go new, you can see all the different types of things you could add. And there's solids, which is like a shape layer, but it's more of like a, it's not, doesn't have as many parameters. It's kind of from a previous version. Adjustment layers, which you're probably familiar with, and then null object is what I was just talking about. And a null object is just that. It's nothing, but it can be a controller. So another thing we have in here that helps with animation is this parent and linking thing. So if I grab all those, and you can click and drag around to select, and then you have the parent column. So if you're not seeing parent and link, right click at the top and see that. You can either pull that down, or there's this handy little thing called the pick whip, which is used in a lot of different areas, and if you just grab this and drag it to that layer, it selects it for you. Now this is like a parent, like a group control. So if I were to hit P on this, I can control the entire group as one thing. And so really, I think what's happening in this video is it's scaling. I mean, that's the simple version. There might be, there is 3D space, so it might be actually flying in, but we can kind of get a similar effect just by scrubbing there. And the way to animate it, any of these parameters, any parameter in After Effects is this, what's called the stopwatch. And wherever you're at on the timeline, if you click that, you get this keyframe. And so you could scrub that to change what you want that to be. Then if we go down the timeline a little bit, and you can either type that in, but as soon as you change the value, it makes another keyframe. And then if you were to drag your cursor here, you can see that doing the animation. Another thing that you might want to know about is if you were to render something out from here and try to make a like actual video of it, it'll render the entire timeline. But you also have this work bar here, the work area, which is this object, and that's if you want to preview something. And so if you hit play on there, it'll play to there and then it'll loop back. So you can kind of see that. Now, the only thing that doesn't get controlled here, I mean, rotation would work, and you could add to that. And so up here also, if you look in the preview, you can see the shortcuts for different types of playing. So I just hit the 0 on the number pad, and now we're seeing that. Now the only thing is these will not be controlled. Opacity will not be controlled with these. So you might have to go in here still. And if you hit T on that, but you have all of them selected, you can hit a keyframe for opacity, make it 0, go down a little bit, up to 100. And then if you want to make another keyframe but not change the value because it's going to be 100 all the way through here, you can hit this little button there and go down a little bit longer, and you can have 0 there. Another handy thing to navigate these keyframes here is these little arrows. So if you click that little arrow, you can jump to the next keyframe. So that should fade in, fade out. Now we did set it to 100, and I think we had some of these not at 100 before, like this was 40 or whatever. So another thing you can do is click it, and you'll see the value if you hover over it, but if you double click, you can put in the parameter there. Now this one's still 100 over here, so it's gonna fade in over time, and we can type in 40 there too. And now it's not gonna. So I kind of got that going on. I mean, that's quite a bit faster. So I have this going over 3 seconds, but those are probably like maybe 1 second each. So if I even grabbed all of these, you can click it. And to set your beginning and work end, it's all about keyboard shortcuts. And if you ever wanted to change any of them, you can come into keyboard shortcuts and customize it, but it's pretty good practice just to learn it. So B will set the beginning of it, N sets the out, and then if I hit 0, and I think what this is probably doing there's some wiggle going on here, so you can see, I think it's like unproportionally as it's going through. So a lot of the parenting that happens, so I might call this null zoom. Yeah, that's quite possible. There's probably a lot of bloom going in there, a lot of there are a lot of presets and effects, and but you can achieve really similar things without needing to get into that. Those can bog you down sometimes. It can be a heavy hit on your system resources, and sometimes you also might be working on something where it's not available. Like if you're freelancing and somebody's computer doesn't have that plugin, or if you're handing off to somebody and they don't have that plugin. I think Bloom Curves probably is from Sapphire, which is a really expensive plugin and could be, just unobtainable for people. So a lot of those plugins are really just combining multiple steps into one easy place to to change it without necessarily doing too much. So if we were to kind of ladder up our parenting, I could make another new null object, and I'll parent this one. I'm going to null scale, and from here I'm going to unlink this. And if you use page up and page down, or shift and page up and page down, you can move around the timeline also. So, and you could, maybe stretch your things proportionally that way. There's also some other things you can do. If you know code, there's ways to kind of write JavaScript in here, which would make it so that you don't always have to keyframe everything. And you can just sort of make these a little bit wacky. And now, I mean, that's not exactly what we're getting there, but kinda. And then if we were to add, maybe you can add effects, like under here there's blurs that you could use. There's a whole bunch of different types of blurs. They all kind of have different characteristics, so you might change that up a little bit. But you could add that to the image itself, or we could make an adjustment layer, and it'll affect everything underneath that layer, of course. So if we wanted maybe it to only affect the pictures but not that, you could put it in between there. And you also have this palette here, where if you don't want to go up here and search for it, you can actually type in whatever it is that you want. And there are some presets, so there might be some things that do kind of exist there. See, but sometimes it's not clear what's happening with it. So, oh, okay, I guess it's like a crazy amount of zoom. But if we were just to use blur and maybe just Gaussian blur is kind of your standard blur. Radial blur is going to be more like a spiral blur. What's up, Z16X? Or is that an L? I think it's a 1. Thanks for joining. Okay, let's see. If I twirl this down, you can see an effect that you drag onto it. You can drag it, or you could just double click it, but you gotta have something selected. And if you weren't seeing it, you could twirl it down and see it, or you can also hit E and see those. So now I've got blur here, and it's gonna blur everything below it. If I put it at the top, it'll do that, and you can keyframe that too. So if I hit U there, I'll be able to see, and we want it to come into focus a little bit as it goes down and then blur way out. And you have these repeat pixels here, which can give you this sort of hard edge if you're looking to keep the edges, or soften the whole thing. So now if I watch this, we're just kind of stepping closer and closer. That sort of look. So I hope that kind of helps a little bit, Anash. Definitely, like you said, you could probably do this in just a couple of clicks with a plugin, but I've been doing this a long time before a lot of those plugins were available, and so I can I don't use a lot of plugins, to be completely honest. A lot of third-party plugins, although I do see the value in some of them. So yeah, you're kind of getting a good sample, and if you wanted to, you could either make this, if you wanted to do more of those, kind of like, okay, we have the first one and then a second one, you could maybe make this number 1 and then duplicate and just I'm going to duplicate this and use, just to make it easy, I'll use a hue saturation just to shift the colors so we can see the difference. Okay, and we'll also make it just an A. So I change both of those layers. Now if I wanted to put those two together, you make a third comp, or you can drag these and drag it onto that. And it'll make it, you can make a single composition or multiple compositions. If you have single composition and don't sequence layers, it'll put them both at the same timeline. If you put sequence, it'll put one and then the other. And now you see my view here, you know, my preview was only this, but inside here I'm getting the full length of that. So you can just trim that by dragging the in and out point of that. If you use your the brackets, the hard brackets, you can move it so the outer bracket will align the out point to it. You can align the in point to it. And it's really just kind of a matter of sequencing them in a way that you want. So if you were to watch that, you kind of get that sort of effect. You're very welcome. I'm glad you brought this example. This is way more helpful, and it's a lot easier to learn the program if you are trying to solve something specific and you know what you're going after. It's a lot of fun to dabble around and just play around, but it can be overwhelming, and a lot of times even exploration and experimentation, I'll have to find myself at a certain point and say, okay, I like that. I'm going to start over and rebuild now that I know how it's going to be set up. And so I might rename this to like edit. And something I do a lot is also create a lot of folders inside here. So I might call this, I use numbers also to help force the organization of it. So I'll put like 3 library. So like my image will go inside the library. My edit comp will go inside number 1, and then these are called pre-comps basically, because what you could do is select all of these inside of here, and if you go up to I've used so many shortcuts it's hard to know where pre-compose is somewhere. If you right click pre-compose, it'll basically drop all those into a new comp. So we'll just call it text 0, and you can see that's just inside of its own comp now. So it's kind of like onion layers diving deep in. And then you've got that, and I mean that's largely, those are kind of the basics, really. That's the main part of it. And it's just kind of using those tools in an interesting way. There's definitely a lot of other effects in here, blurs and distortions that you could add to this. Like I said, I think there's some other stuff going on here. So like we selected the one inside and you went to distort and did something like maybe well, there's a whole bunch of things. Bezier warp is going to be like allow you to kind of bend it. Bulge is sort of like a magnify effect. Mesh warp. Turbulent displace is a very common one, or wave warp. Wave warp would give you like this sort of waviness. And that's probably not what you want for this effect, but if you were looking for something that was kind of more like I get a sense of it's like a fiery distortion, you know, that you would see if like from like a heat kind of thing. And so for that you can use something like turbulent displace. So distort, turbulent displace, and you get this kind of, there's a couple of different settings, ways to do it, but it can make it a little bit more wobbly. And some of these effects have something in there called evolution. So the settings are there, but if you, and it's like a radial, you can keep on, you can kind of see it's wiggling a little bit in there. I'll make it bigger to be more obvious. You can change the size of it, but you could drag that. And I think that is a large part of what's happening in that that Sapphire plugin. It's like adding a displacement as well as probably some color toning. So if you went into color correction, there's some interesting things that you can, of course, recognize: broad brightness and contrast, levels, hue, saturation. But there's stuff like tritone, where it'll take the white, black, and midtones, and you can remap that. And something that you could do with that is blend with the original. So this is pure tritoned, but if you put it to 100, you get none of it. And then if you dial that back just a little bit, and if you also animate the evolution, you're kind of getting, you know, a little bit of that kind of heat displacement. Okay. I unfortunately need to wrap this up for today, but I do appreciate you all coming and viewing. I'll check out the Gmail and my site again. I will definitely schedule another one of these and ask for some questions beforehand. One other thing that I do have here, I'll pull up my, so my channel is After Effects Tech Desk, and I have a whole bunch of videos about animating within specific techniques. There's some of that code stuff. I have some playlists that try and break down different things for beginners versus more intermediate versus some of the expressions, which is the coding that I mentioned, if you happen to be into coding. And know that that can be a helpful tool to get you around a lot of problems. I also have my aetechdesk.company.site, sort of the hold all site for where to access things. And then I have a Gumroad shop, which just is for the most part free files. I have a template structure that I use for just about every project. So if I go into my freelance, I have this template here that I use for just about every single one. So I can put the project name, the client, and then the date. And then inside here I have all my different folders. So I have an AE file that's already set up. You can put your items in there, library for images or any kind of resources, audio, video that you want to bring in. If I open this up, you'll see that, actually let me save this first. I tend to put years first and then the date. Helps organize things that way. And if I open up that template, go ahead, open it up. I don't know why it's not. Oh, see, After Effects 2025 does not like to open files when I double click them. So I'll go locate that object. What the heck? Okay. So if I go into AE files here, I'll just show you the structure real quick of that. So I have exactly what I showed you. You might get that warning. That's no big deal. It'll say converted. Basically, it's hard to save down in After Effects. You can always go up, but if you need to go down to an older version, you might have to go save as a copy as 24.x, 23.x. But here's the structure that I typically use. I have this main comps folder, pre-comps, library with all of my different items in here. I have one for QCing my exports. And you can grab that from that Gumroad page. I'll put that in here. Gumroad.com. And inside there you can get some files from other tutorials that are on my page. So yeah, I am going to wrap it up. But thanks so much for watching. And I hope to see you next time.